Last month, Rick and Morty got renewed for 2 more seasons, meaning that despite its massive 78-episode order back in 2018, the series will be going beyond season 10, with seemingly no end in sight. And yet, no one really cares! Nowadays, when Rick and Morty comes up in conversation, it's usually about how the show fell off, and is a far cry from its glory days. There's no denying that the show is just not as popular as it once was. Like, it's always going to have a massive audience by virtue of streaming. Teens and college students are binging the series for the very first time. Older fans are going to go back to those first few seasons for some good laughs. Some bartender might just throw it on as background noise. The list goes on. But despite that staying power, every time a new season drops, it seems to get less attention than the last, and it's been that way since season 4. While a good chunk of that has to do with the downfall of cable and way less people having access to premieres on Adult Swim, I think it's also an issue with the show itself. It would help if these episodes went up next day on Max, as that platform has plenty of shows with a dedicated audience, like The Penguin and Fiona and Cake. Why is there so much disinterest in Rick and Morty? Well, as easy as it would be to say,
"This show just isn't good anymore,"
it's a sentiment that I don't completely agree with. Yeah, I wouldn't say recent seasons have come close to the quality of the first 2. That was just an era you can't duplicate. But with seasons 6 and 7 being a step up from 4 and 5, it's obvious that there is still gas in the tank. The problem is, Rick and Morty has become incredibly frustrating for a lot of fans. It's like if you had a kid who killed it in college, was super popular and accomplished all these great things, but now they live in your basement and they're just kind of running on autopilot. Some days are more ambitious than others. It feels like the franchise doesn't really have its priorities in check and has been struggling to evolve in a meaningful way. Something that extends beyond the main series, as we recently had the snoozefest that was the anime. Don't worry, we'll get there. Today, as someone who's still a huge fan of the series and has covered it on this channel over the last 8 years, I want to talk about why I think the show has dwindled in popularity while airing my grievances with the last few seasons. I'm Oshrik Vox, and this is the frustrating state of Rick and Morty. If you ask someone where they thought Rick and Morty started to fall off, they'd probably point to season 3. It wasn't a bad season by any means, but it unleashed the undying curse that is Pickle Rick, while giving us the drawn-out Beth and Jerry divorce arc that just ended with them getting back together. And of course, this is the era where the show exploded in popularity, which inevitably led to an explosion of cringe.
I want Szechuan sauce! Where's my Szechuan sauce?
But here's the thing. The further we get away from season 3, the more I like it. I was disappointed with it back in the day as, to be blunt, I wanted more lore and evil Morty. But now, I think this season is actually aging pretty well. And although it's a bit weaker than the first 2 seasons, it's stronger than the next couple seasons. And that's because, even though the crew was toying around with the status quo, the show still retained a strong sense of identity. It knew what it wanted to be. I can't say the same for seasons 4 and 5 because, while it looks like the same old Rick and Morty on a surface level, wacky sci-fi adventures, family drama, and hilarious ad-libs, a lot changed behind the scenes. Season 4 was the start of their massive 70-episode order. It was allegedly the first season where Roiland more or less resigned himself to being a voice actor for the series, barely showing up to the office. The long gap between seasons 3 and 4 meant bringing in new writers again, who had to get a feel for writing these characters. And if that wasn't already a lot, they literally changed the structure of the show. As you may already know, the first 3 seasons were faithful to the Dan Harmon story circle, a narrative structure that breaks down a story into 3 acts with 8 plot points. It's a tried and true method, and if you're an aspiring storyteller, give it a whirl. In an attempt to keep things fresh, the writers of Rick and Morty ditched Harmon's circle for a brand new approach to cracking stories, throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. Kinda. Let's read a 6-year-old article. With Adult Swim recently ordering 70 more episodes, Harmon believes Rick and Morty could go on indefinitely, but he does plan to shake things up with a more anarchic writing style. Rather than focus on A and B stories and certain jokes and bits of dialogue that might fit together, Harmon and his team will instead develop, nurture, and cultivate ideas, moments, conversations, jokes, stories, premises, and swaths of dialogue, with no emphasis on one aspect over another. Anything that makes them laugh will be worthy of attention, and only as a last resort and at the last minute will these items be collected into episodes. It's a sort of deconstruction of the process. process, focusing on moments first and structure second, rather than the other way around. That is, the usual way. Most experienced show creators would find that daunting, but not Harmon. The last thing I want is to be the guy who makes Rick and Morty sterile, he says with a shrug. Uh-oh! I understand why they went with this new approach, as 1, season 3, despite aging well, is still objectively weaker than the first 2 seasons, so switching things up feels like a good call. And 2, it seems like an easier way to deal with the 70 episode order because they can come up with some really solid bits and keep it in their back pocket for years before finally being able to put them into an episode. It goes from, do we have enough ideas for 70 episodes, to, are 70 episodes even enough for all of these ideas? Evidently, it wasn't.
It's up to us to break the show, and it's up to us to change the show and to let the show grow.
Yet it still feels like the show lost something special with this approach. A common criticism that I've seen since season 4 and still see, even now, is that the show doesn't feel as funny or cohesive. And I think that's partially because a lot of these episodes don't really feel as structured as older seasons. A lot of the time, it feels like they're just building off a bit until something crazy happens in the third act. The dragon episode, the heist episode, the incest baby episode. Oh wait, he was in more than one. The dinosaurs, the Mr. Poopy Butthole intervention, whatever the hell the Numericons episode was trying to be, the list goes on. So many episodes now don't feel as polished as the older seasons. Not that season 1 was the most polished thing in the world, but at least they felt like they were making every episode count. And even though it's been years since I've seen some of those episodes, I can still remember what happens in the beginning, middle, and end of most of them. Because the way they were structured helped the escalation feel natural and ultimately led to more memorable episodes. What do you remember about the episodes I just named? The best scene in the dragon episode is at the very end, and it wasn't even about the dragons. It was about Jerry's wacky B-plot with the cat. The heist episode had that weird Elon Musk cameo. I wonder if they regret that at all.
I'm gonna play Minecraft.
Oh, my kids play that.
I don't like these little jabs you get in, Elon.
They may not have trouble coming up with 100 more episodes, but they do seem to struggle with making all those episodes interesting from start to finish. Don't get me wrong, I think every season gives me at least 1 or 2 episodes that I'd consider some of the best of the series. Episodes that feel like prime Rick and Morty, The Vat of Acid, Rick Mirai Jack, Analyze Piss, and Fear No More, just to name a few. These are episodes that could only be done in Rick and Morty, living up to the highs of season 1 and 2. Overall though, the newer seasons still don't have the greatest banger to flop ratio, which I think only irritates some fans further, as for every episode that's okay at best, hundreds of Rick and Morty heads flock to the internet to complain about how we're barely getting any sort of update towards whatever plot thread the show is currently breadcrumbing us with.
Any progress? Yes, Morty. I found the version of me that killed my wife. You just missed it.
Serialization in lore is something the show has always struggled with. I'd even argue that it's the center of its identity crisis. The show clearly wants to have lore, continuity, and an epic overarching story, but it also wants to have a bajillion goofy one-offs so that they can be syndicated and streamed until the end of time. And the end result is something that's very unsatisfying to watch. This is where I believe that season 3 knew what it wanted to be, unlike the following seasons. Season 3 was built around Beth and Jerry's divorce, with nearly every episode exploring how the divorce has impacted the family. Beth wants to figure out what she really wants out of life that she didn't get out of her marriage with Jerry. Jerry is being Jerry. And ultimately, the family comes back together and sets boundaries with Rick, which carries over into the first episode of season 4. And then kinda stops? Season 4 seems like it wants to continue examining the complicated relationship between Rick and Beth and how she's trying to put her foot down while keeping him involved with the family. But the show loses that focus until the season finale with the introduction of Space Beth, who doesn't really do anything in season 5. I think she only appears once. Season 4 wrapped up on this moment where Rick is all, I'm a piece of shit, Morty. I don't know which daughter is real, blah, 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 blah. Which not only feels like a retread, but it doesn't really go anywhere next season. They say they do these big episodes to reward the viewer, and while I think this whole finale is dope, what about this conclusion feels rewarding?
Rick self-sabotages and he's depressed again.
Haven't seen that one before. Season 5 seems to be about Rick and Morty drifting apart as a duo. Rick doesn't treat Morty as an equal and views him as just disposable. Nothing we didn't already know, but alright, let's see where this goes. Not every episode touches on it, but things come to a head in the season finale, and it loops back into the Evil Morty storyline, which is really cool. But then season 6 feels like it kind of repeats the arc again, especially with things like Rick replacing himself with a robot, and Morty being excluded from the hunt for Rick Prime. Not to mention, season 6 felt like it was trying to mark a new era of the show, with Rick getting a new ship and portal travel being offline for the first half of the season. I thought we were about to get a new portal gun, and now they're setting up Rick Prime as an active threat? Let's go! But Rick's new ship blows up a few episodes in, so they go back to the old one, and portal travel just kind of gets fixed at the end of an episode. It's not that cathartic or anything, it kind of just happens. And Rick Prime doesn't appear again until the next season, which made the post-credit scene with him at the end of season 6's premiere feel, really anticlimactic. Hell, season 6's two-part finale just ends with them hyping up how crazy season 7 will be. And while it did have some good episodes, Rick Prime wasn't even dealt with until the mid-season finale, being mentioned like once or twice beforehand in the season. They set things up only to do nothing with them for 2 more real-world years. It's frustrating. I'm getting old. I don't want to be in my 30s seeing how the Evil Morty storyline wraps up, but at this rate I will be. It doesn't help that they were passive-aggressive about the lore, calling out fans who wanted more high-stakes adventures that involved the likes of the Galactic Federation or Evil Morty, and when we finally learned Rick's backstory, they had to immediately undercut it with a joke.
Dead wife?
Yes, now everyone can shut up about it.
I can't lie though, I do think it's funny. It's Rick's cadence. It's crazy because they would make fun of fans who wanted more lore and narrative-focused episodes, but every time they make those episodes, they tend to be some of the better ones. I think almost all the lore episodes would be in my top 20, and it's not just because of any big story reveals. I genuinely think they're funnier and way more polished than most episodes surrounding them after season 3. It just felt like the show was at war with itself, and used the excuse of breaking the fourth wall to take it out on us. Like, why do you losers like our lore so much? Keep watching every week, by the way. And it's like, shit, I don't know, because it's cool? Sorry for being a fan. I think they finally mellowed out with season 7 as Air Force Wong, Unmort Rickon, and Fear No More don't undercut any of their serious story-related moments and treat it all with sincerity. And with at least Unmort Rickon, that episode was written by people who started out as fans of the show and had already been working on it for a while. They already had immense respect for the series and its fan base, so it makes sense that translates to the final product. I hope they keep it up for future seasons. But if they make another joke about the lore they keep feeding into, I'm challenging Dan Harmon to a boxing match. But on that note, the topic of lore, or lack thereof, is actually a perfect segue to another gripe I have with the show. So here's the thing. I've gotten over Rick and Morty only dedicating a couple episodes per season to lore. If they want to have a bunch of wacky adventures that start and end at the Smith household, then be my guest. But I've come to realize that it isn't the lack of advancing the overarching narrative that frustrates me. It's the fact that the show introduces a ton of cool concepts and storylines, usually through those lore episodes, only to take the easy way out when it comes to handling them. And make no mistake, the show loves taking the easy way out. A great example of this is Bird Daughter, the daughter of Bird Person and Tammy, introduced in Rick Eternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort as a prisoner of the Galactic Federation due to her father's status as an intergalactic terrorist. Bird Person clearly has some resentment towards Rick for hiding this from him, and you know, being a shitty friend, so there's groundwork for a really interesting follow-up. Maybe we'll see Rick forcing himself back into Bird Person's life by having him and Morty break into space prison and save Bird Daughter. That in itself has Rick and Morty written all over it, parodying prison escape movies while giving us a much needed return of the Galactic Federation and putting us in a brand new location while mending the fractured relationship between Rick and his best friend. Even if Bird Person was apprehensive about Rick helping out, could he really say no? After all, we saw how crazy it was for Rick to break himself out of one of these places, and he's Rick. There's no shot Bird Person could rescue his daughter all on his own, off screen, right?
I also found your Federation hit list.
Ugh, don't go through my stuff! This place is
worse than prison.
This motherfucker rescued his daughter all on his own, off screen. It's one of those decisions where you can't help but ask, what was the point? Why introduce this plot point only to handle it off screen with a lame joke 2 seasons later? Ooh, now she's an emo teen who hates her dad. Haven't seen that one before. I don't even mind that she ended up like this, but I would have liked to see the journey there. It's not even like casual viewers would be lost if they missed the last episode of Bird Person, because it takes 2 seconds to explain that he has a daughter locked up in the slammer, and Rick wants to help save her to prove that he's a good person. The way they went about it truly just feels lazy. Like they floated the idea, didn't know they wanted to commit to it, but they wanted to use Bird Person for the season 7 premiere, so again, they just took the easy way out. His daughter's home, let's move on. Another example is Jessica. Remember Jessica? Morty's unrequited love turned into an actual romantic interest, but also not really. The show was caught in a cycle of Jessica being the generic popular girl who Morty has a thing for, but she's a little hot and cold with him. If she isn't with someone else, then Morty's adventures with Rick are getting in the way. It seemed like the two were trapped in a never-ending cycle, until the season 5 premiere, Mort Dinner Rick Andre. Morty's beef with the entire population of the Narnia dimension leads to Jessica getting captured and encased in a crystal, fully conscious as she spends centuries observing the realm, not only altering her perception of time, but her entire philosophy on life, dubbing herself as a time god. And you know what they do with this? Nothing! Jessica practically disappears from the show after this, only popping back up in that god-awful Rise of Numericons episode, as she's seen on a date with Morty, which feels like the show is kinda soft relaunching her character. Like they got tired of the will they won't they, gave her some super interesting development as a way of writing her off, only to say, never mind, she's normal again. You could argue that since they switched from C-131 to the Parmesan universe, the events of Time God Jessica just didn't happen in this dimension, but I'ma be real, that's lazy. What? So Space Beth and Bird Daughter happened in this dimension, but not the domino effect that was Rick's dinner date with Mr. Nimbus? Eat my ass, dude! I'm not buying it! It's just another instance of the show taking the easy way out. And speaking of Space Beth, she might be the best example of what I'm talking about. She's been around for 2 seasons at this point, yet she still feels underutilized. This is a Beth that's following in her father's footsteps, embracing her smarts and extensive skill set. But aside from hooking up with herself and tagging along on a couple of adventures, she really hasn't done much. The whole intergalactic rebel who's at odds with the Galactic Federation aspect of her character is largely ignored, and it bums me out. This is a huge change to the status quo, but they seem so unwilling to do anything meaningful with it. How have we not had a Take Your Child to Work Day episode where Morty and Summer join her on a mission? She's tapped into their adventures, but what about the other way around? Even doing an episode like that once, and having the kids come to the conclusion that Space Beth's job is a little too intense for them, would be better than doing nothing with her. I also can't ignore that, although the big lore episodes are cool, they're not absolved of this issue either. Evil Morty becomes president of the Citadel. I wonder how their society will change under his authority. Oh, they just make a joke about Glendale that people who don't live in LA probably won't get. And then the Citadel gets destroyed again. And there goes Evil Morty fucking off into the multiverse. Oh man, they're really hyping up Rick Prime as a big deal. I wonder how many episodes he'll be around for. Oh, that's Rick Prime getting killed in his second major appearance. Oh, Evil Morty escaped, and now there's a rift in this central finite curve? I wonder if that'll lead to anything. Nope, they fixed it. But it's okay! Rick made a joke about it.
We could have milked that thing for a whole season, or like a 3-episode arc at least.
How the fuck would you show me something if I couldn't have it?
It feels like the writers come up with a really cool idea for the series, only to throw it to the wayside instead of building upon it. Maybe they couldn't figure out an interesting direction to take it in, so they pivot. Or they just got bored, so they got rid of it. Either way, I'm not loving it. I also feel like this habit of taking the easy way out has trickled down from the writing to some of the designs. For example, a lot of the aliens don't feel as, well, alien as before, especially in season 7. And while that can lead to fun episodes like That's Amorte with the spaghetti people, a lot of the designs just don't feel as thoughtful as the earlier seasons. The most alien we got in season 7 was with the fucking Numericons and Alphabet people. potential. I don't know about you guys, but I think that's pretty lame. There were aliens in that Mr. Poopy Butthole episode, but again, a lot of their designs aren't as appealing compared to the earlier seasons. Maybe that's a result of having to constantly churn out episodes. Maybe the process is a lot more streamlined, but it's still disappointing nonetheless. But enough dogging on the main show. It's time to bite the bullet and switch gears to something I've been dreading to talk about. Mostly because it means I have to finish it, and that is the anime. The Rick and Morty anime might be 2024's biggest example of wasted potential, which is crazy to say when we also had Uzumaki, but hear me out. Every time Adult Swim reminded us that the anime existed, people couldn't help but ask, who is this for? Most Rick and Morty fans wouldn't be into it because there's no connection to the main series, and most anime fans wouldn't bother giving it the time of day because it's Rick and Morty, a cartoon past its prime that's made some pretty dated jokes about anime. Plus, let's be real, a decent amount of Rick and Morty fans think anime is cringe and vice versa. Obviously, there's overlap of people who enjoy both, like me, but I can see how it might have been a hard sell no matter what. However, I truly believed in the anime, as not only did I enjoy the shorts, but I immediately saw the potential. What I tend to love most about anime is that a lot of them have compelling conflicts, rich world building, and more often than not, an action-heavy narrative. And with the proper amount of time and resources, all of this can be brought to life with dynamic animation that's harder to come by with American productions. Unless you're MAPPA, then you'll always have movie quality work by violating the Geneva Convention. So combine all of this with the insanity of Rick and Morty, and you may have an excellent 13-episode run that gives us a taste of what the series could have been if it not only took advantage of the lore, but took the show's philosophical themes a bit more seriously. Give us the serialized epic that a good chunk of fans have been begging for since the end of Season 2. I'll even settle for the Evil Morty storyline being retold in a more dramatic fashion, incorporating more of the characters we know and love, and making deviations to keep things fresh. But instead of getting anything like that, we just got another Adult Swim anime. It's heartbreaking to see as someone who's been rooting for Toonami's success ever since its revival, but it's pretty obvious that Adult Swim does not have the resources to do these newer anime justice. Uzumaki and Ninja Kamui are some of the biggest disappointments this year in the anime scene, and I think that disappointment was amplified by the two starting strong before spiraling pretty hard and pulling every time-saving trick in the book. And in the case of Ninja Kamui, I think limited resources also handicapped the story because how did we go from John Wick to a mech fest? The Rick and Morty anime continues the trend of Adult Swim anime feeling restricted in what they can do. Now, plenty of people have dunked on the anime's writing and execution. I don't need to regurgitate any of that, but to make a long story short, the anime's biggest problem is just that it's boring. And I'm not only talking about the lackluster dialogue and confusing, non-linear storytelling that viewers aren't really enticed to piece together. This show is also a snooze fest visually. Not only is the animation a downgrade from the main series, but it feels claustrophobic to watch. Like everything is really close to the screen, to the point where some of the backgrounds are showing pixels. Zoom out, bro! Why does this show look like it cropped itself to avoid a copyright strike? And speaking of backgrounds, so many locations in this show lack atmosphere, and a lot of them feel kind of barren. It made me appreciate the main series a lot more in that regard. In the cartoon, every location they go to looks like a place you want to run around and get lost in. I definitely can't say the same here. Like, how does space look this boring? It's space! Anime always makes it look cool. The character designs leave a lot to be desired too, especially the original alien designs. Makes me feel like I was going a little too hard on the cartoon. And the action in this is just gross. There's no energy to any of the set pieces. They never have a moment where everything fires on all cylinders. It's just bland. Things never get as colorful or trippy as the opening, which is a shame as that's something you would expect from a project in the Rick and Morty franchise. Really, anything cool you would expect from anime just isn't found here, and it makes me feel embarrassed for ever feeling optimistic about it. The story itself was fine, I guess. I always try to appreciate a good love story, and on paper, it was framed in an interesting way. But in execution, I just couldn't find myself to care about Elle. She has a pretty basic design, and I don't think she has a memorable personality at all. She feels more like a plot hook than a character. The whole thing made me realize that Adult Swim already made a pretty good Rick and Morty anime 10 years ago. It was just called Space Dandy. And that wasn't a serious anime with an epic overarching narrative. It was a goofy sci-fi comedy with a mostly episodic structure. Space Dandy was made at the right place and at the right time, not only having a beautiful 26 episode run, but it was given the time and resources to look awesome. Compare all these different alien designs to those found in the Rick and Morty anime, all of these planets, these shots of space and goofy ass expressions. Space Dandy clears on all fronts, and it's actually funny. Nearly every episode had a different director too. Unlike the Rick and Morty anime, which mostly had the same director for every episode, so many talented people got to play around with these characters and this world. No episode feels alike, and none of them feel boring. Which, you know, is exactly how the Rick and Morty anime should have felt, but whatever. Despite being as silly as can be, Space Dandy still manages to tie all the episodes together in the end, utilizing multiverse shenanigans in a way that the Rick and Morty anime could only dream of. Space Dandy is everything this could have been and should have been. So if you're not convinced a Rick and Morty anime could have worked, check out a few episodes, then come back to me. Truthfully, I can't ever see Rick and Morty getting cancelled or ending at Dan Harmon's request. Plenty of adult cartoons just go on forever nowadays, and with the abundance of merch and brand recognition it has, I doubt the franchise will stop being profitable anytime soon. So with that said, is there any hope the series can recover? That even if it never reaches the heights of the first 2 seasons, it could reach a point where it outgrows the number of issues presented today? And the answer is, I think it's already halfway there. Despite some stinkers here and there, I truly believe the last 2 seasons have been a step in the right direction, with the best episodes of season 7 being written by longtime fans who understand why the series became so iconic in the first place. In my opinion, that's what we need more of. Professionals who know how to tell a good 22-minute story that also harbor a deep love for the show, because as evident with Unmort Rickon and Fear No Mort, that passion for the show can be infectious, transcending the script as the art direction and storyboarding feel like they've also cranked themselves up to 11. But this is also my observation as an outsider, so we can't say for sure how the crew really feels. I just think the show is at its best when it feels like the crew is having fun, and considering the number of episodes they have to produce, I imagine it's tough to be excited for every single one. Still, Rick Prime's taken care of, Evil Morty's on civil terms of our Rick and Morty, and the status quo is at a place where they can start a new story arc that won't take years to reward the viewer with a ton of cop-outs in the process. Maybe just aim for a simple season-long arc. If we can have that, and more episodes that feel experimental rather than paint by numbers or completely incoherent, then who knows? Maybe in a couple of seasons, I'll be talking about Rick and Morty's big comeback. They actually released a season 8 preview while I was finishing up this video, and they already seem to be stepping up their game in the design department. All of the aliens that appear for a quick bit managed to put those in the last couple of seasons to shame. But as always, these are just my thoughts, and I'd love to hear yours. How do you feel about the current state of Rick and Morty? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the vid, I'd appreciate it if you threw it a like and hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.